The rain had been falling in a steady rhythmic drumbeat against the windows, as if the heavens themselves mourned the loss of Gregory Whitmore. I sat in the old Victorian house, now silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the soft sigh of the wind against the sea. The house we had built together. The house that had seen the laughter of our children, the warmth of our shared meals, the quiet comfort of nights spent with nothing but each other and the stars above. It was a place of memories, a place where I thought my heart would always find a home. But now it felt hollow, like an empty shell washed ashore and left to face the world alone. I was 62 when Gregory died. He wasn't old, not by a long shot, but something inside me had known even before the doctors confirmed it that this was not just a man who had passed away from a natural cause. It was something darker, something deeper, and I couldn't put my finger on it. The feeling had lingered in the air, thick and suffocating, ever since that moment, the moment I had found the letter. It was the day after Gregory's funeral. Everyone had left, all the guests, the family members, the well-wishers who barely knew our story, yet were quick to offer sympathy in a way that made me feel like a ghost in my own life. The funeral had been quiet, too quiet for a man who had worked his entire life for the good of his family, a man who had built something from nothing. I had thought maybe there would be a bigger crowd, more people who had known him, more people who had respected him. But the church was half empty, the cemetery sparse, and as I looked around, I couldn't help but feel as if the world was already forgetting him. The storm had started during the service, just as the pastor had begun to speak about eternal rest. The rain fell harder, as if it too were shedding tears for a man who had spent his days mending broken things, his hands, his heart, and his soul, only to be struck down so suddenly, so inexplicably. I had stood there numb, my gaze locked on the polished wood of the casket, and for the first time in my life, I had felt completely, utterly alone. When the last mourner had left and the sky turned a bruised purple, I found myself in the kitchen, staring blankly at the papers scattered across the table. I hadn't even noticed the phone buzzing in my pocket, not until it rang again, the screen flashing with an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. There had been too many calls since Gregory passed away, too many people offering condolences, asking if I was all right, people who didn't even know him, not really. I almost didn't answer. I almost let the call go to voicemail to be erased with the thousands of others that seemed so trivial in comparison to the weight I carried. But something inside me told me to pick it up, that I couldn't ignore this one. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper, a fragile thread of sound that I barely recognized as my own. A long pause. Then a voice, low and gravelly, a voice I couldn't place. "Gregory's not dead, Elena." I froze. The words hung in the air like smoke, curling around my thoughts, choking them. I looked at the phone, half expecting to see some prankster's number, some sick joke. But it was an unknown number, a local area code. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I said Gregory's not dead. That's not him in the casket." The voice repeated sharper now, as if this was the moment of truth. "They want you next." I felt the blood drain from my face, my heart thudding in my chest. My stomach lurched as if I had been punched in the gut. The world tilted on its axis, and for a long, horrible moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Who was this? And why were they telling me this? Who knew about the funeral? Who knew about Gregory's death? Who is this? I asked, the words strangled by fear, but the line went dead. No click, no beeping, just silence. My pulse pounded in my ears. I sat down hard, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But I couldn't. It didn't make sense. None of it did. The world had suddenly become a labyrinth of dark corners, twisted hallways, and shadows that moved when I wasn't looking. It was then that I noticed the envelope, the one that had been sitting unopened on the kitchen counter for days. I had almost forgotten about it, caught up in the chaos of grief and funeral arrangements. I reached for it with trembling hands, my fingers shaking as I tore it open. Inside was a letter scrawled in an unfamiliar handwriting. "Elena, it's all a lie. Gregory didn't die by accident. I've been watching. You have to be careful. Don't trust Sophia or Lucas. They're after something. They're not who you think they are." I read it twice, my mind racing. What was this? Who wrote this? My children. They were the only ones left, the only ones who had been close enough to Gregory to know about his life insurance, his business dealings, the house. Sophia, my eldest, always had that look in her eyes, the one that said she wanted more. She had been pushing for years for Gregory to sell the house to move into something more modern, more practical. And Lucas had been distant for years, always with his own problems, his failed investments, his mounting debts. I never said anything, never questioned him, but now I saw their behavior in a new light. Were they planning something? Had they wanted this, I felt the walls close in around me. My whole life I had trusted these two, my children. But now the world felt different. The love I had given them, the sacrifices, the years I spent raising them, felt like a betrayal. What if they were after something more than money? What if they were after me? The words from the letter, the mysterious voice, the cryptic message, each one gnawed at my soul, pulling me deeper into a spiral of doubt. I had to know the truth. I had to find out who was lying, who had killed my husband, and why. I couldn't stay here in this house surrounded by memories of Gregory without finding out what had really happened. The weight of the storm outside seemed to mirror the storm inside me, as if the very elements were conspiring to strip away the last remnants of peace I had left. I would never be the same again. The days that followed were a blur, a haze of unease that clung to me like the fog rolling in from the sea. The storm outside hadn't stopped, and neither had the storm inside me. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling against the windows made me jump. The house, which had once been a sanctuary, had become a prison, its walls closing in on me. I couldn't escape the sense that something terrible was lurking just out of sight, something that had been right under my nose the entire time. The letter and the phone call gnawed at me relentless like hungry teeth, sinking deeper into my thoughts. I tried to make sense of it all, but I couldn't. My mind kept racing back to Gregory's death, how sudden it had been, how unexpected. At first I had convinced myself that it was just a tragic accident, a heart attack, or something else that the doctors had missed. But now, in light of the cryptic message, everything seemed suspicious. What if it hadn't been an accident at all? What if Gregory had been taken from me deliberately? What if my own children, Sophia and Lucas, had been involved? I couldn't shake the thought. I couldn't stop wondering if I had missed the signs, if I'd been so blinded by love for them that I hadn't seen the way they had changed over the years. I'd always known that money was a powerful motivator, but the thought that my own flesh and blood might be capable of such a thing, of betraying me, of betraying Gregory, seemed impossible to accept. But now the more I thought about it, the more everything seemed to point in their direction. Sophia, my eldest, had always been ambitious. I had always admired her drive, her desire to make something of herself. But recently, there had been something in her eyes, a hardness, a coldness that I hadn't seen before. She had been pushing for Gregory to sell the house for years, arguing that it was too old, too much of a burden. She had spoken often about the need to modernize to get with the times, but I had always brushed it off. It wasn't until after Gregory's death that I started to wonder, had she been trying to sell the house for another reason? Was it because she knew how much it was worth? Or had she always seen it as something to be sold for profit? Lucas, my youngest, had never been one for ambition. He'd always been content to live his life quietly, working on small projects, tinkering with machines, building things with his hands. But over the last few years, something had changed in him too. He had become distant, closed off. His visits had become less frequent, his phone calls shorter. There were always excuses: "I'm busy, Mom." You know how it is. But I knew deep down that something wasn't right. I had tried to ignore it to convince myself that it was just the stress of his personal life. His relationship troubles his mounting debts. But now, in light of everything that had happened, I couldn't help but wonder, had he been hiding something? Had he been involved in something darker than I could have imagined? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been blind to it. All that I had been so wrapped up in, my love for them, so desperate to hold on to the family, I thought we still were, that I had missed the truth. They weren't the same people I had raised. They had changed, and not for the better. The first piece of evidence came the day after I received the letter. I had gone through Gregory's personal papers, his files, his accounts, anything that might give me some answers. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to look. I had to understand what had happened. It was in the locked drawer of his desk that I found the first sign that something was wrong. It was a life insurance policy. I had seen the original policy years ago when Gregory and I had discussed it, but this was different. This was a new policy, one that had been increased significantly in the last year of Gregory's life. It wasn't just a small bump, it was substantial. The coverage had been raised by over $500,000. Why hadn't he told me? Why hadn't we discussed this? I pulled the paper from the drawer, my hands trembling as I read the details. The beneficiary, of course, was me, at least that's what it said. But something about the increase seemed off. I knew Gregory had always been careful with money, and he never would have made such a drastic change without discussing it with me. The more I looked at the policy, the more it felt like a trap, one that had been set long before his death. I called the insurance company the next morning, trying to make sense of it all. They confirmed that the policy had been altered several months before Gregory's death, but they wouldn't give me any further details without a signed release from the beneficiary. That made sense. It was standard procedure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been hidden from me, something important. I had to know the truth. That afternoon, I called Raymond Jacobs, the private investigator that Gregory had hired. I had found his number in one of Gregory's files tucked away in the back of the drawer where he kept his most private documents. Raymond had been hired by Gregory a few months before his death, and I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Gregory had never mentioned it to me, but in retrospect, I wondered if he had been trying to protect me from something. When I called him, I explained the situation as best as I could, my voice cracking with emotion. I told him about the strange phone call, the letter, and the insurance policy. Raymond listened carefully, asking questions here and there, his tone professional, but sympathetic. "I can look into it, Mrs. Whitmore," he said after a long pause. "I'll need to gather some information, but I'll keep you updated. I've worked on cases like this before. I'll find out what happened." I hung up the phone, feeling both relieved and terrified. I had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth, but I knew that it would only lead to more questions, more doubts, more fear. What if Gregory had known something that I didn't? What if he had seen something in Sophia and Lucas that I couldn't see? And if that was true, what did that mean for me? The next few days were a blur of phone calls, notes, and meetings with Raymond. He had started to gather information, speaking with people who had worked with Gregory in the last months of his life, people who might have known if anything unusual had been going on. It was through these interviews that I learned something disturbing. Gregory had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to his death. He had become paranoid, worried about someone, but he never said who. He had been distant, withdrawn, more secretive than usual. It wasn't long before Raymond uncovered something else, something that made my blood run cold. One of Gregory's colleagues, a man named John Miller, had overheard a conversation between Lucas and Sophia in which they had discussed the life insurance policy. They had talked about how much money they would make when Gregory was gone, how they could finally escape their financial problems. And worse still, Sophia had been the one to suggest the idea of speeding up Gregory's death, of making it look like an accident. The shock of hearing this, of realizing that my own children might have been involved in something so monstrous, was like a physical blow. I felt my world tilt, my legs weak beneath me. How could they have done this? How could they have betrayed us all for money? But the evidence didn't lie. It was all starting to make sense, the push for Gregory to sell the house, the sudden increase in his life insurance, the strange behavior of Sophia and Lucas. They had seen his death as an opportunity, a way to secure their futures at any cost, and they hadn't cared who they had to hurt to get it. As I sat in the kitchen that night, the weight of the truth finally sinking in, I knew one thing for certain: I had to act. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let my children get away with murder, no matter how much I loved them. The truth had to come out, and I would be the one to make sure it did. The days after Raymond's discoveries were like walking through a fog, each step uncertain, each breath heavy with the weight of the truth. I couldn't get the image of Sophia and Lucas out of my head, their faces, their lies, their cold indifference. They had been plotting against Gregory, and now they were plotting against me. For weeks, I had been living in a kind of denial, convincing myself that my children were just going through difficult times, that they were misunderstood. But now I saw them for what they truly were, strangers who wore the masks of the children I had raised. Raymond's investigation had been a slow burn, a careful peeling back of layers that I hadn't even known existed. His first breakthrough had come when he discovered an email chain between Lucas and a financial advisor in New York. The emails were all about debt restructuring loans that had been taken out by Lucas under a false name, and discussions about how much Gregory's life insurance policy would be worth. What had been shocking wasn't just that Lucas had borrowed money from shady sources, but that he had never told me. I had seen the changes in him, the distant calls, the sudden absences, the quiet desperation, but I had never suspected him of anything so underhanded. The more I thought about it, the more everything seemed connected. Sophia had been the one to urge Gregory to sell the house, to liquidate the property. I had just assumed it was because she was trying to help us simplify our lives. She had even mentioned moving to a smaller house a few times, but I thought it was her way of trying to be practical to get us out of the house that had so many memories tied to it. But now I knew better. She had seen our home as a commodity, something to be sold off to fund her own desires. She had manipulated me, played on my love for her for the sake of her own greed. The phone call from the anonymous number still echoed in my mind. They want you next. Who had said that? Who knew enough to understand that I was in danger, that Sophia and Lucas weren't just distant, but actively working to take everything I had? The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotions that left me gasping for air. I had trusted them. I had loved them with everything I had, and now they were the ones who would destroy me if I let them. I knew I had to confront them. But how? How could I face the two people who had been my world for so many years, the two people I had given everything to? How could I look them in the eye when I knew what they had done? They weren't just my children anymore. They had become something else, something I couldn't recognize, something dangerous. One evening, after Raymond had uncovered more information about the way Sophia had been involved in negotiating the insurance policy change, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to act. I had to confront them, but not just to accuse them. No, that would be too easy. I had to confront them with the truth, with irrefutable evidence that they could not deny, evidence that would leave no room for excuses, no way to turn the tables. The confrontation came on a cold Friday evening, the kind of evening where the world feels a little too quiet, as if everything is holding its breath. I had invited Sophia and Lucas over to the house, hoping that they would come. I didn't want to force them, didn't want to give them a reason to resist, so I played it off as a casual invitation. Let's have dinner, just like we used to. Come and visit. We need to talk about things, about what comes next. but in the back of my mind, I was preparing for something much more difficult. I wasn't sure what their reactions would be, but I knew deep down that I couldn't let them off the hook. This wasn't about healing old wounds anymore. This was about justice, about protecting myself from the people who had tried to tear my life apart. As they walked through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. Sophia was the first to speak, her voice still carrying that tone of forced cheerfulness, the one she always used when trying to keep up appearances. Lucas stood behind her, his arms folded across his chest in a defensive posture, eyes scanning the room as if he were trying to figure out the angle of the conversation. "Mom, you look—" "Well," Sophia said, her voice faltering for a split second, but then quickly recovering. "We haven't seen you in a while. How's everything going?" I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "Everything's fine," I said softly, but with a calmness that startled even me. "Actually, there's something I need to talk to you about." Lucas shifted uncomfortably, and Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. It was there, but it was quickly masked by her practiced composure. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I've been going through some of Gregory's papers," I began, my voice clear and measured. "There's something I need to ask you about. Something important." They exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that said they already knew what was coming. Sophia's expression was unreadable, but Lucas's was not. His eyes narrowed just slightly, his jaw tightening. I slid the life insurance policy across the table toward them, watching as their eyes scanned the document. I watched Sophia's lips twitch, her fingers twitching as though she wanted to reach out and snatch it away, but she held back. "You didn't think I would notice, did you?" I asked, my voice dropping lower, colder. "The life insurance policy, the increase in coverage. You didn't think I'd find out, did you?" Lucas shifted in his seat. "Mom, you don't understand." He began, his voice shaky but defensive. "This is about security. You know we've had our struggles. We were just trying to make sure you were taken care of." His words rang hollow in the silence of the room. I met his eyes. "No, Lucas, that's not what this is about. You've been talking to financial advisors, haven't you? You've been planning this for months. You knew about Gregory's policy, didn't you?" Sophia tried to speak, but I cut her off. "And don't think I didn't hear about the conversations you had with your brother, about selling the house, about how much money you could make from this. I heard everything, Sophia. Everything." For a long moment, there was only silence. It was the kind of silence that felt heavier than words. Lucas looked away first, but Sophia held my gaze, and for a second, I could see something like regret flash across her face. Then just as quickly, it disappeared, replaced by the same cold mask she always wore. "You've always been so naive, Mom," Sophia said, her voice flat. "You never saw what we were up against. We had no choice. You and Dad were holding us back. We had to make it work." "Holding you back," I echoed, my heart racing. "You were trying to kill your father. You were planning to kill me, too, all for money. And you think I'm naive." I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, and in that moment I realized just how far they had pushed me. They were no longer my children. They were criminals, and they had to be stopped. "You will never get away with this," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. "I will go to the police. I will make sure they hear everything you've done." Sophia and Lucas didn't say a word, but their expressions said it all. They knew I was right. They knew the walls were closing in around them. But in the end, it was too late. The truth had come to light, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. As they left the house that night, I stood in the doorway watching them walk away. The house felt quieter now, but it was no longer the oppressive silence of despair. It was the silence of justice being served. I had taken the first step, and no matter what happened next, I knew I had done the right thing. The battle for my future had just begun, but I would fight, and I would win. For Gregory, for me, for the truth. The moment they walked out the door, I felt something inside me shift as if the last few years of confusion, doubt, and fear had suddenly been peeled away, leaving nothing but clarity. There was no turning back now. I had confronted Sophia and Lucas, and in that moment their guilt had been written all over their faces. The lies, the manipulation, they couldn't deny it anymore. I had seen it in their eyes. I knew it in my bones. They were capable of betrayal so profound that it shattered everything I thought I knew about family. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood in the doorway staring at the cold, empty street outside. My children, my flesh and blood, had just walked away from the only person who had ever loved them unconditionally. It was a devastating realization, one I knew would haunt me for the rest of my life. But in that silence, something else began to settle in, something that had been missing for far too long resolve. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt since Gregory's death. The storm inside me had passed, and what was left was a calm certainty. I couldn't just sit back and allow them to destroy everything we had built, everything Gregory had worked for. I had to act, and I had to act quickly. Raymond Jacobs was already at the forefront of my thoughts. The private investigator had been working tirelessly to uncover the truth about Sophia and Lucas's betrayal, and now it was time to take the next step. I called him early, my voice steady despite the weight of the task ahead. "I need you to gather everything we have." I told him, my words sharp and precise. "I'm going to the police today. We have to make sure they're arrested. We can't wait any longer." Raymond's response was calm, professional. "I'll have everything ready for you. We've got all the evidence we need, Elena. We just need to make sure we do this the right way." I hung up the phone, feeling a surge of adrenaline course through me. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I wasn't just a mother who had been betrayed. I was a woman fighting for justice, fighting for my life. The truth was on my side, and I knew that would be enough. The plan was set. I would meet Raymond at the police station where we would present everything we had uncovered Sophia and Lucas's involvement in Gregory's death, the insurance policy, the fraudulent financial dealings, and the recordings of their conversations. We had it all. Now it was time to make sure the world knew the truth. The police station was bustling when I arrived, the clatter of voices and footsteps echoing in the sterile halls. Raymond was already there, waiting for me in the lobby, a folder full of evidence in his hands. He gave me a reassuring nod when he saw me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. We were escorted to the detective's office where Sergeant O'Connell, who had known Gregory for years, was waiting for us. The look of recognition in his eyes was bittersweet, and I could see the sympathy in his expression. But there was something else there, too, a quiet respect. He knew what this was going to be about, and he didn't need to ask any questions. He had seen too much of the darkness in families like mine. "We have everything we need," Raymond said as he slid the folder across the desk to the sergeant. "The insurance policy, the bank records the recordings and the statements from Sophia and Lucas's colleagues. It's all there." Sergeant O'Connell opened the folder, scanning the documents, his face growing darker with each page he turned. He didn't say anything for a long time, but his silence spoke volumes. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes heavy with understanding. This is beyond what I expected, Elena," he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and sorrow. "Your children—" "I know," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't believe it either, but I have to do this. For Gregory. For me." Sergeant O'Connell nodded solemnly. "We'll make sure they face justice. You've done the right thing." That was all I needed to hear. The weight of the decision I had made finally settled into my bones. I had done it. I had taken the first step, and there was no going back. Now it was in the hands of the law. The next few days were a blur of activity. Sophia and Lucas were arrested, their fates sealed by the evidence we had gathered. The police moved quickly, filing charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Sophia's expression when she was taken into custody was cold, unfeeling. There was no sign of remorse, no sign of regret. Just the same mask she had worn throughout the entire ordeal. Lucas was different. When the officers arrived to arrest him, I could see the panic in his eyes. He tried to resist, but it was futile. The guilt, the fear, it was all there written across his face. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him, but the moment passed quickly. He had made his choices. They had both made their choices, and now they had to face the consequences. I didn't attend their arraignment. I couldn't. I couldn't bear to look at them, to hear their lies, to watch them try to twist the truth. The trial would come soon enough. For now, I had other things to focus on. The days following their arrests were a strange mixture of relief and grief. I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, but at the same time, I couldn't escape the sadness that lingered in my heart. My children were gone. Sophia and Lucas, not in the physical sense, but in every other way. The people they had become were unrecognizable to me. I had lost them long before they were taken into custody, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. I threw myself into the foundation. The pain of what had happened was still fresh, but the work gave me something to focus on, something to give back in Gregory's memory. The Ernest Whitmore Foundation for Victims of Family Betrayal began to take shape. It started small, but the response from the community was overwhelming. People reached out, people who had suffered in silence, people who had been betrayed by their own families. The foundation became a beacon of hope for them, a place where they could find support, find justice, and find peace. As the trial approached, I found myself growing stronger. The months that had passed since Gregory's death had been a blur of grief and anger. But now, as the day of reckoning neared, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in a long time. The truth was on my side, and I knew that justice would be served. On the day of the trial, I stood in front of the courthouse, the weight of what was about to happen heavy on my chest. Sophia and Lucas were already inside, facing their charges. But I was calm. I had no anger left, only the quiet certainty that they would pay for what they had done. Inside the courtroom, I listened as the prosecutor laid out the case against them. The recordings, the bank statements, the insurance policy, everything came to light. I sat in the front row, my eyes focused on Sophia and Lucas, whose once proud faces were now twisted with fear. Their defense was weak, filled with excuses and empty apologies, but it was too late. The truth had already spoken. When it was my turn to testify, I stood with unwavering strength. I looked at my children, my former children, and I spoke from the heart. I loved them. I said, my voice steady. I gave them everything I had, and they repaid me with lies, with betrayal. But now the truth will come out. They will face the consequences of their actions. The jury deliberated for hours, but the verdict was inevitable. Sophia and Lucas were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge's sentence was harsh, but fair life in prison for Sophia, without the possibility of parole for Lucas. The weight of it all hit me in that moment, but it wasn't the pain of a mother losing her children. It was the pain of a woman who had fought for justice, who had fought for the truth to be heard, and who had finally won. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. The house, once filled with the echoes of my family, now stood as a reminder of what had been lost. But it was also a symbol of my resilience, of my strength. I had faced my greatest fear, and I had emerged victorious. And I would continue to fight for myself, for Gregory, and for all those who had been betrayed by those they loved. The battle was over, but the war for peace had just begun. The days that followed the trial felt like a long exhale, as if I had been holding my breath for years and could finally let it out. The conviction of Sophia and Lucas had given me a sense of finality, but it also left me with a hollow kind of peace. The weight of the past was still with me, heavy in my chest, but I had finally seen justice done. I had fought for the truth, for the memory of Gregory, and for my own sanity. But the real challenge had just begun, finding a way to rebuild my life in the wake of everything I had lost. The house had always been the heart of our family, the place where we had shared so many memories, the home where Gregory and I had raised Sophia and Lucas. But now it felt empty, like a shell. The rooms echoed with silence, a silence that was both comforting and painful. It was a reminder of everything I had lost: my husband, my children, the family I thought we had. Yet strangely, it was also a symbol of my survival. I was still here. The house still stood, and I would rebuild it piece by piece. I started with small things, cleaning out Gregory's workshop, which had once been his sanctuary. The tools were still there, lined up neatly on the workbench, as if he had just stepped out for a moment. His favorite chair sat by the window where he used to sit and watch the sunset after a long day's work. I didn't know what to do with it, but I couldn't just leave it there untouched. So I cleaned, organizing the space just as Gregory had always done, but I did so with a sense of finality. It was the last thing I could do for him. The house slowly began to take on a new energy, though I knew it would never be the same. I painted the walls, choosing a soft, welcoming color. Gregory had always loved warm tones, earthy colors that made the house feel alive, full of warmth. Now I chose a soft beige, a gentle reminder of the love that had once filled these rooms. I fixed the creaky door hinges and replaced the worn-out carpet. Each repair, no matter how small, felt like a reclaiming of the space, like I was taking back control of my life. The most significant change, though, came when I turned Gregory's workshop into a garden. It was something I had never imagined doing before. Gregory had always loved working with his hands, but I had never been a gardener. Still, I wanted to do something in his memory, something that would allow the house to live on in a way that felt true to us. I planted flowers, roses, sunflowers, lilies, and lavender, his favorite flowers. I dug the soil with my own hands, my fingers bleeding from the work, but there was something cathartic about it. The earth was rich and forgiving, and with each plant I set into the ground, I felt a little bit lighter, as if I were planting hope along with the flowers. Over the next few months, the garden flourished. It became a peaceful place, a sanctuary where I could go to sit and think. I spent hours there trimming the roses and tending to the sunflowers. It was a quiet act of rebellion, a declaration that I would not let the darkness consume me. I would grow something beautiful from the ashes of my past, something that would outlast the pain and the betrayal. The garden became more than just a tribute to Gregory. It became my healing space. It gave me something to focus on, something that required my attention, but also allowed me the space to grieve. I would sit there in the soft sunlight and think about all the things I had lost, but I also thought about what I had gained: strength, resilience, clarity. I wasn't the same woman I had been when Gregory died. I had been tested, and though the scars would never fully fade, they had given me something I never expected: an unshakable sense of self. As time passed, I found myself slowly stepping into a new role. The Ernest Whitmore Foundation for Victims of Family Betrayal became more than just a project, it became my life's work. I poured my heart into it, helping families who had suffered in ways that felt all too familiar. At first, it had been a way to honor Gregory's memory, but soon it became a source of strength for me. I would speak to the families who came to us for help, hearing their stories of betrayal, of grief, of loss. And I would listen not just as someone who had been through it, but as someone who understood that the pain could be transformed into something powerful. The foundation grew. We provided financial support to victims of family crimes, connecting them with legal resources, private investigators, and therapists. But it wasn't just about the logistics of helping people, it was about giving them a voice, letting them know that they weren't alone. Every success story, every family we helped to find justice was a reminder of the strength I had found in myself. I wasn't just healing, I was helping others heal too. In the midst of all this, I found new friendships, real ones, grounded in shared values and mutual respect. One of those friendships was with Raymond. Over the months, we had worked closely together, but something had changed between us. We began to spend time together outside of work, talking about everything and nothing. He was different from anyone I had ever known, steady, kind, and patient. He didn't push me to move on or to forget the past. Instead, he allowed me the space to heal at my own pace. And in return, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Raymond and I had dinner together one evening at a small restaurant by the water. It was the first time I had been out in public in months without the shadow of grief following me. I had worn a simple dress, one that made me feel a little more like myself again. We sat at a small table by the window, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I felt lighter, as if the years of pain had finally started to shift into something else, something good, something new. I never thought I'd be here. I told him, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass. I never thought I'd get to a place where I could actually think about the future. Raymond smiled, his eyes warm. "You've done the hard work, Elena. The rest will come. You're stronger than you think." The words were simple, but they held so much truth. He was right. I had done the hard work. I had faced my greatest fears and come out the other side. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, not just for Gregory, but for me. And I knew that I wasn't done yet. There was still more to do, still more people to help, still more flowers to plant in the garden. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The weeks turned into months, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. I still visited Gregory's grave every Sunday, bringing fresh flowers from the garden. The headstone now bore an inscription that was simple but profound: Ernest Whitmore, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than his death. It was a truth that had come full circle. My family was broken, yes, but it wasn't beyond repair. I had rebuilt it brick by brick, memory by memory, and I had found peace in the process. The foundation had become a lifeline, not just for others, but for me. It was my way of turning the pain into something meaningful, something that could change lives. As I sat on the porch of my home, the sun setting over the horizon, I realized that the woman I had become was not defined by the betrayal of my children or the loss of my husband. I was defined by my ability to stand up to face the truth and to rebuild something beautiful in the wake of unimaginable pain. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at us, and sometimes those challenges come from the people we least expect, our family. Betrayal is a powerful force, one that can shake us to our core. But through it all, I've learned that while we can't control the actions of others, we can always control how we respond. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but healing is possible. Strength comes from within, from facing the truth, even when it's painful, and choosing to rebuild our lives with courage, not fear. In my own journey, I've learned that the hardest moments often lead to the most profound growth. I've had to let go of what I thought my family was and embrace the painful truth of what they became. But through this, I've discovered new strengths I didn't know I had. I've learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about love, respect, and trust. When those things are broken, we owe it to ourselves to walk away and rebuild, not just our lives, but our self-worth. For those of you who may be walking a similar path, know this: you are stronger than you think. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be angry, but don't let those emotions define you. Use them as fuel to heal, to grow, and to find peace. Reach out for support when you need it. You don't have to go through it alone. Whether through professional help, close friends, or organizations that support those who've experienced family betrayal, there's always a way forward. I want to hear from you. If you've faced betrayal, or if you're struggling to find your way through difficult times, feel free to share your story or your thoughts. You're not alone in this journey. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. It's my hope that in sharing this, I can offer even the smallest amount of comfort or encouragement to someone who needs it. Stay strong, stay resilient, and remember, the truth always has a way of finding the light.